there are quite a few reasons to start in Genesis. I mean, it is the beginnings. That's what the word means, Genesis. It means beginnings or foundational things. So it makes sense to start there. And it really is the beginnings. It's the beginnings of the world as we know it. It's the beginnings of humanity. It's the beginnings of our understanding of God. It's the beginnings of God working with man. It's the beginnings of the picture of Christ. And what I want you to see as we get started, as we look at this, is that the work of Christ was not a backup plan. Pretty soon we will be, listen, buckle up for the truth I'm about to share. Pretty soon we will be preparing for Christmas. I said it. It's the truth. I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately, but they're already ready. Pretty soon we will all be preparing for Christmas. And we start thinking about Christmas, we think of little baby Jesus eating in a manger, and it's so cute. And we think, well, that was a really neat picture for God to paint. And I think that's about as far as we get. I think we need to understand that the plan of God expressing himself to us in that way, that was a plan from the very beginning. That is the Word of God. If we open up to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and I was asked twice, so I will tell you all, I will be reading and studying from the CSB, Christian Standard Bible, not because it's the best one, not because the version you use has some sort of problem, but simply because it resonates well with me. It's easy for me to study. I like the way it handles the language. So if you have the CSB or you want to, you'll get the same words. If you don't, it'll be kind of fun for you to compare. We will be making available to you some study guides in time, if we can get them shipped to Alaska, that are in the CSB, in the Christian Standard Bible version. But anyway, we will be starting with Genesis chapter 1, and we're only going to make it through about Genesis chapter 5 before we break for the study of Christmas. And I want you to see, as you look at this, this is the plan of God. He designed this world with you and me in mind. He designed this world with Christ in mind. He knew it was all going to go south. One of the things that we see right at the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, where it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We see a parallel right away with John chapter 1. And so I want to flip over there real quick and read John's words in John chapter 1. He also says, in the beginning, but he says it slightly differently. He says, in the beginning was the Word. Go back to Genesis. In the beginning, God. That's 3 words. In the beginning, God. In John chapter 1, in Greek, 3 words. In the beginning, the Word. That makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. Because, I mean, let's just be really honest for a moment. We don't know God all that well. We really don't. There is so much about God that we may never be able to fathom. I'm okay with that. But He has revealed a lot of Himself to us. He's told us a lot about Himself. And He's done it in a variety of ways. One of the ways that we're most familiar with is right here, the Bible. He has talked about Himself and about how He views the world and about how He does things and given us His story. He's used His actual words. And we'll have a chance to study them over the course of the next months and years, and we'll see specifically what He said about Himself, and in the process we'll get to know Him better. I remember when Wendy and I were dating. This was, 200 or 300 years ago. We met as juniors in high school, and shock of all shocks to my children, we did not have cell phones at that time. And so we had to communicate by talking with one another face to face. But when we weren't face to face, we wrote notes on notebook paper, and we folded them up in cute artistic ways, and we handed them to each other between classes. I would show up at school every day to a fresh note that Wendy had written me that evening, probably before bed or in the morning, And I would respond to it, and we would write notes back and forth all day. And honestly, I still have in a box a collection of a good portion of those notes. Because as she spoke to me in that way, she revealed more and more of herself to me. I began to know her and understand her through those words that she gave me. He not only speaks to us through this word, he also speaks to us through what we'll read again in John a little bit later. His word, the Logos, Christ. He reveals himself to us in Christ. That's his word to us. That's him speaking to us. Personally, though, now, face to face, he comes and speaks to us in Christ. And he speaks to us in one other way. The psalmist says, the heavens declare the glory of God. He speaks to us through creation. You know, my children have drawn me pictures over the years, and I've tried to keep as many of them as I can, even though Wendy says I can't keep everything. I try to keep as many of them I can because those pictures that they draw tell me something about them. And so in creation, we can see a lot about who he is and what he is like. In his word, there are specific words that he uses to tell us about himself. And I really like that. One thing we're going to see tonight is that he uses two words to talk about making things or creating things. Two very different words that mean two very different things, that talk about him creating things, all within a couple of verses of each other. And I like that. You know, I had heard, coming to Alaska, that many of the native tribes that were here long before any European language got here had multiple words for the concepts of snow and ice. One of the dialects, I'm not going to try to say it because I'm going to butcher it and then Tom will laugh at me, has 70 specific terms for ice. Terms about ice that lasts year after year. Some of it has to do with the patchwork layer of crystals on the sea. Some of it has to do with ice that's starting to freeze, and some that is done freezing and is solid, and some where it's just beginning to melt, and some of it is ice that's filled with holes, and some of it's ice that's solid, and all these different terms for ice. That is not weird. I am from the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington. We have nearly 100 terms for rain in the Pacific Northwest. Drizzle, mist, sprinkle, showers, scattered showers, rain, pouring rain, light rain, hard rain, fast rain, stratiform rain, which is that rain you can't really see, but it just soaks everything, but that's not mist, because mist you can see. Convection rain, that's that rain that comes in billowy clouds. Driving rain, dumping rain. We have lots of forms of the concept of rain. I know a guy in Yuma, Arizona. There's rain and there's ice. It just doesn't matter to him in Yuma, Arizona. But it mattered to us in the Pacific Northwest, and it matters to people up here. You learn a lot about the individual person as you begin to discover the different words they use to describe something. And in these first 5 chapters of Genesis, each word is very important. Now, when we get to chapter 6, we start telling a different story. And we get to chapter 11, we start telling a different story. But in these first 5 chapters, which are some very poetic Hebrew chapters, everything that God says about himself is incredibly important. So we start with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God. That's, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We got to get our English full sentence in there. To the Hebrew, this is a complete clause. In the beginning, God. That's it. That's what there was. The term in the beginning, like I mentioned before, means exactly that. At the start of all things. But there's an implication there that goes even deeper. See, the idea is God was there before the beginning. That's the implication. That there was already God when the beginning happened. That's going to matter in a minute. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The created there is the word bara, and it means created from nothing. He created it out of nothing. There were no materials. He just began to make it all happen. And already we have a problem. Because there's a lot of people that say, nah, it doesn't happen. You can't do that. You have to have something that creates something. You can't do that. Now, you can make something out of stuff, but you can't just create something. Besides, they say, there's got to be another answer besides God. There's got to be another answer. Honestly, it's the easiest possible answer. But they say, no, there's got to be something more complicated than that. And so they start delving into the area of theory. Now, some people will say it's science, but science is observable and repeatable. I wasn't there at the creation. Were any of you, some of you are older than me, were you there at the creation? Nope. None of us observed it. None of us were there. None of us can repeat it. Can you create out of nothing? I can't create out of nothing. It's not observable. It's not repeatable. So it's completely theory. We sit around and think about how things could have happened, and you all know what the most popular current theory is. It's what we would refer to as evolution in all of its various forms. That things just kind of happened. That one day, things just kind of happened. And boom, we're here. That's the current most popular theory. There are some holes in that theory. Very briefly, I'll share with you the three biggest holes in that theory. One of them is a philosophical problem, and it's the issue of first cause. That's a scientific law, that everything exists had to have a cause. Everything had to have a cause. And they'll come to us and they'll say, you can't have God create the universe out of nothing because there's no cause. Well, you can't have nothing create nothing either because there's still no cause. There's no cause. Where's there a cause? And they say, well, who created God? And here's my answer to that. That's not my problem. It's not my problem. I don't actually need to answer that question. Because if someone or something created God, that honestly doesn't have anything to do with me. That, quite frankly, is God's problem. Because at that point, God is answerable to whomever or whatever created him. He must answer them. If he is their creation, then he must fulfill whatever it is that they've created him for. Now, I don't think that's the case just between me and you. And I'll show you why in a minute. I'm pretty convinced that God is the uncaused cause. Nonetheless, if I make something, I expect it to fulfill a certain need. You all had some banana cream pie before we started the study today. Some of you did. If I make a banana cream pie, I expect it to fulfill a certain need. It's got to be tasty and put a big smile on my face and make my belly fat. And if it doesn't, it was a complete waste of materials and a complete waste of time. And that banana cream pie is accountable to me to fulfill that need. And if it doesn't, I throw it in the trash. So if somebody created God, he's accountable to them. But here's the deal. It doesn't change the fact that God created me. And if God created me, I'm accountable to him. And you see, there's the problem. Some of you are asking about my youngest daughter, who is 15, and she's in a new high school here. And you're asking about what high school she goes to, and she goes to a Christian high school here, a smaller Christian high school that has worked really hard to make that affordable for us. And I'm excited that she gets to be there, and she's really enjoying it. But one thing that irritates her just the littlest bit is the dress code. Why do we have to have this silly dress code? Now, you got to understand, she is one of the most modest dressing kids I know. She really is. That's not the issue. It's just, some of the girls want to dye their hair. And in their dress code, if you're going to dye your hair, it has to be a natural color. That's just part of the dress code. Apparently, somewhere in their history, that's been a distraction. And so they've said, no, let's just go with, if you want to do that, highlights or whatever, that's fine. But none of this, bright lime green stuff. Now, my daughter has never dyed her hair and has no interest in doing so, but it still bothers her just a little bit because these girls aren't free to express themselves. We are so American, so individualistic. We must express ourselves, and nobody is allowed to control our expression. We must be free to be ourselves. We're going to talk about that week 3 when we get into Genesis chapter 3. We're going to dig into that deep. But right off the bat, we have this problem that if God is the creator, then I am accountable to him. You know that's why evolution as a naturalistic theory took off and became so popular, right? Because people found in that the ability to not have to be responsible to God. If nobody created me, I am responsible to no one. I can do whatever I want. And if I'm no more than a hairless monkey, then there is no problem. There is no responsibility, past or future. It doesn't matter what I do. I can do whatever I want. In the beginning, God created. The second issue with any kind of naturalistic cause for creation, evolution or whatever you might choose, is an issue of ethics. It's the issue of morality. In the world of modern thinkers, modern philosophers, that want to deny the existence of any kind of a God, morality is a huge problem. I don't think about it too often, you might not think about it too often, but where morality is a really weird thing. Who told us? Did you know that not a single culture on earth now or ever in history has ever thought it was okay to torture babies for fun? It's never been a thing that's okay. Some of them have tortured babies, but not for enjoyment. That's just not okay. And as mixed up and strange and amoral as our culture is trying to become, it's not even okay here. Who told us that? Who told us that's not okay? Where'd that come from? And as you look at all of the other moral and ethical things that we think about, and so many of them that we're trying to set aside in our modern culture and struggling to set aside, we have to keep coming back to the concept, who told us this is not okay? Who told us that it's not okay for a boyfriend to beat up his girlfriend? Who told us that? Why is that not okay? And I'll spare you the long, arduous lecture. It comes down to only one concept. It comes down to the concept of what philosophers call a transcendent personal being. Someone outside of our realm, transcendent, personal, who could talk to us, being, who had a personality enough to not be a computer, but a living creature, came and conversed with us and said, that's not okay. And the third problem with any kind of naturalistic cause actually is science itself. Do you know what the second law of thermodynamics is? I only know this because I've had children, not because they came home from school and told me, but because I've seen it in action. The second law of thermodynamics is everything goes from order to disorder. And it's the truth. This is why if you start your car in neutral and push it down a hill, eventually it'll either run into a tree and stop or it'll just slow down. The second law of thermodynamics. This is why, and this is why I know this law. You can spend all week cleaning your 6-year-old's bedroom. And 2 days later, it'll be toast. How did that happen? Because naturally, it goes from order to disorder. This is why my shirt is wearing out. My favorite shirts, it's wearing out. Because everything goes from order to disorder. Naturalistic creation of any kind depends on the concept that everything goes from from disorder to order. And interestingly enough, that's addressed right here in the very beginning of the concept of Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created from nothing the heavens and the earth. By the way, this is going to help you out. The Hebrew concept of the term heavens is a threefold concept, all right? Heavens means three things to the Hebrew, the word. We have three different things for it. They didn't. They only had one word for it. There is heavens that is our atmosphere. There is heavens that's beyond our atmosphere, we would call outer space. And then there is heaven, the place where God dwells, that's outside of the universe. They put it all in one lump sum. That's the heavens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it says right here in verse 2, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the surface of the watery depths. and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Now the earth was formless and empty. Tohu and bohu are the words. And that's really interesting, because it wasn't supposed to be. I know it wasn't supposed to be because it tells us in, where is that? It's in Isaiah 45. I can't find the verse right now, and I'm actually skipping things so that y'all don't have to sit here all night. Moving ahead in my notes. In Isaiah 45, it tells us that God did not create the world to be tohu and bohu. That wasn't his intention. It wasn't supposed to be. This is something that Hebrew thinkers have toiled on for generations. It tells us in multiple places that God didn't intend for the world to be a chaotic mess. He intended it to have order and be filled. What happened? Well, this is an important part of the story. And this is something that we really need to think through. And the easiest way to think through it is to skip over to Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. And I'm not going to make you read that tonight. You can write it down and read it later. Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 tells a story of two different kings that Hebrew thinkers have long considered had to not be referring to those kings at all, but rather referring to someone that they call Lucifer, a name that comes out of Isaiah 14. You see, here's the thought, and this matters, and this will come up later, especially when we start studying Christmas. Here's the thought. When God created the world that we live on and the humans that live in it, he created us for the purpose of worshiping him, of seeing his glory, and of surrendering ourselves to living in his glory. That's what he created us for, was to be worshipers of his. We're actually going to see an analogy of that when we get to day 4, which hopefully we'll get to tonight. That's what he created us for, to be reflecting his glory. And along those lines, he had a created being that he had created to guide us in that, to lead us in that. C.S. Lewis really expands this concept in his Space Trilogy, which is a total fiction work that expands this concept a lot. The idea that this being, Lucifer, was made to be, if it were, the great worship leader that would point us all to the glory of God. He was made for that purpose and assigned to this earth for that purpose. This is some really old ideas, and we're having to fill in the blanks to come up with this, but it makes good sense and it helps to understand the story. Now, the problem is, as you all know, he wasn't content with that. Did you know that in order to worship, you have to have choice? Nobody can force you to worship anything. I think that Studebaker Avantis are one of the coolest cars that were ever made. On top 10 list of cars I'll never own that I wish I would is a Studebaker Avanti, 1964, with the R2 Macola supercharger. Black with a red leather interior and factory air conditioning, please, and a 4-speed. That's, I think, a fantastic car. I remember Wendy and I were on our honeymoon, and we were on the Oregon coast, and they were having a car show. And yes, I drugged my new wife to a car show on our honeymoon. And the reason I did was because somebody had a 64 Avanti there. And I said, look at this car. Isn't this the most fantastic thing you've ever seen? And she was like, listen, I got something I need to do. No, I said, you got to see this thing. It's amazing. I am in awe of this 64 Studebaker Avanti supercharged. And she was like, yeah, whatever. I could not force her to, if you will, worship the car, to see the worth of the, you can't. Worship has to be a free choice, because worship is an expression of love, and love doesn't work if it's not a free choice. In order for worship to work, even for the great worship leader, it had to be a free choice. And so the choice was given that he would be able to worship. And Lucifer, the great worship leader, said, I choose not to, since I have been given this free choice. And since I am as cool as I am, he said, I choose to worship one creature, and the creature I choose to worship, he said, is me. Once again, that's going to matter a lot when we get to chapter 3. You're going to see how that plays in. So the concept is, before God even got around to finishing putting the earth together, here comes Lucifer making a mess of it. Isaiah 45, he didn't create the world to be formless and void, to be bohu and tohu. But in the beginning, when he created it, it was. It was tohu and bohu. It was a mess, and we blame Lucifer for that. So what's God going to do about it? Well, a couple of things. First of all, the Spirit of God was there. He was hovering over the waters. He was waiting and preparing. And that really speaks to me because my life gets chaotic from time to time. And I wonder if God is even doing anything. Well, yeah, He is. He is hovering over the waters. He sees the chaos and is preparing to do something amazing. And here's the amazing thing that He did. Verse 3, God said, "Let there be light," or in Hebrew, literally, light be. Light exist. There was darkness because of the chaos of what the enemy was doing. And God said, light. Let there be light. Flip back over to John chapter 4 real quick. John chapter 1 real quick. This is so cool. First 4 verses. In the beginning was the Word. We talked about that. The Word, the Logos, and of course we know that that's Christ, the ultimate expression of God for us. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God in the beginning. All things were created through Him, and apart from Him, not one thing was created that has been created. In Him was life, and that life was the light of men. His life is the light. That light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. God said, "This creature has come to bring death to everything I've done, but you know what? Light be." And what was that light? That light is His life. And chaos begin to get ordered. That's always how it works. That's always how it works. I talked to 2 different people today from this church who were telling me stories about people who have found Christ recently in their lives. And both of those stories started with the person in chaos and darkness and beginning to receive light in their life. That's how it works. He calls us out of chaos and out of darkness into His life, which is light. God said, "Light be, exist." And there was light. And verse 4, God saw that the light was good. The word is tob, good. It means exactly what you think it means. He saw that the light was good, pleasant, fulfilling, doing everything it was supposed to do. And so God separated the light from the darkness. That's how chaos begins to become ordered, is with separation. He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called light, and there was evening and there was morning, one day. Now, hold on, we got to understand something here, and this is going to matter when we get to Easter. In Hebrew, the day does not start at midnight. Who came up with that idea? That the day starts at midnight? That's a crazy idea. Now, listen, when I worked graveyard for a while, that was about right. But for the most part, the day doesn't start at midnight. When does the day start? I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 a.m., something like that. I don't know. In the Hebrew mindset, the day did not start with the light and go to the darkness like it does for us. The day starts when the sun comes up and it's light. Well, maybe not in the wintertime around here, but the day starts when the sun comes up. The day ends when the sun goes down and it gets dark. Not to the Hebrew. The day starts in the darkness. The day starts in the Hebrew mind. Jewish people have to be very succinct about things, very exact. So the day starts in the darkness, and the darkness is defined as when you can see 3 stars in the sky, which might work in the Middle East where it ain't so cloudy, but around here, maybe not. When there are 3 stars in the sky, that's when the new day starts. That's the evening. And the day gets brighter and brighter and brighter. You know why? Because God said, "Let there be." And that's the way our life works. Our life starts in the darkness. We don't know Him. We don't have the light, which is His life. We don't have that. But over time, more and more, more and more and more. And see, the idea is you get more and more and more and more and more and more and more until His life is such a light in you that one day you just kind of glow away. Hebrew concept. Evening, then morning. It's day 1, One day. Hebrew word is yom for day. It means 24-hour period, literal 24-hour period. Throughout the entire Bible, anytime that we see Hebrew word yom used, even in extra-biblical sources, it always means 24-hour period. The writer of this really said God did that in 24 hours. The writer of this really said God did the whole thing in 6 24-hour periods. And that's a problem for some people. I mean, I couldn't do that in 24 hours. How could God do that in 24 hours? And they got all these great theories. There's what's called theistic evolution. We talked a little bit about evolution before. There's this concept of theistic evolution. And theistic evolution says, well, we got to give some room to those theory guys. So we're going to say that God used the millions of years of evolution to create everything. But that's not what this says. It says he did it in a day. And then there's the gap theory people that say, no, you don't understand, see. There's a gap of hundreds of billions of years in between each verse. But the Hebrew writer says one day, now listen, do you know who wrote this? It was Moses. Now, Moses wrote it down, or Moses had it written down. Where did Moses get this information? Well, here's the deal. Genesis chapter 1 particularly is one of the most perfect examples of Hebrew poetry, and it is beautiful. I remember studying this when I was learning a little bit of Hebrew. I did just a little bit of Hebrew study, and when I did, I got to study this, and it'll just give you chills. It is the most amazing, beautiful Hebrew poem you have ever seen, and it's so fantastic, and it's so memorizable. And that's why it's that way. We're going to have a district Bible quiz meet here on Saturday, and the kids are going to come, and they're going to have memorized 20 Bible verses or Bible sections, little kids, because it's all put to music. I remember when my kids were doing that. I still remember a bunch of the songs. I mean, I can spout for you, 60 verses right now because I learned the songs, you know? Well, that's the concept. This is a beautiful piece of poetry that Hebrews have been teaching their children, well, since the beginning. And so some will say it's not for real, it's just a poem. It's not for real, it was just put. Moses wasn't there. He didn't see, he's pretty old, but he didn't see it. So it didn't happen that way. Here's the problem. Here's the problem I have with that. Jesus believed it. I know Jesus believed it because he referred to it many times. He referred to Adam and Eve like they were real people. I mean, he refers to the Genesis account so many times. Clearly, he thought it was true. Now, you can say Jesus wasn't there, but I think he was. You know why I think he was? Because Jesus claimed to be God. And as God, he claimed to be the creator, just like John said, like we just read. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And through him, all things were created. Nothing was created that he didn't create. That's what John says. Now, Jesus backed up his claim. Jesus told them, you don't think I'm God? Tell you what, destroy my body, and I'll live again in 3 days. And he did. Jesus, they said, give us a sign that you're really God. And he said, I'll give you a sign. It's the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days, so I'll be in the belly of the earth for 3 days. But on that third day, I'll rise again. And he did. And nobody else has ever done that. I mean, those were his evidences. And when we get to that point and we can talk about those evidences, you'll see that it's absolutely incontrovertible. Nobody has ever studied the resurrection of Christ with a serious and honest heart and a good mind and ever come to any other conclusion that, yeah, he actually did that. Well, then he was there. And he said it happened like this in a day. Blows my mind. I don't know. But I got to believe it. One day, he began to order the chaos in one day. He keeps going, starting with verse 6. Then God said, let there be an expanse between the waters, separating water from water. Let me explain that just a little bit. The atmosphere is water. Now, at one time, many actual scientists are convinced that at one time, there was an atmospheric layer that we no longer have. and it was made of water, and it was frozen. That there was almost like a frozen ice shell all around the world. Now, there's some really good evidence for this, because if there was a frozen ice shell all around the world, it would do some things. It would cause our current atmosphere to be more compacted or thicker. The same makeup, just more dense. It would also cause a worldwide greenhouse effect that would hold the whole world in a kind of tropical state. The whole entire globe would be mid to high 70s, higher humidity. And if that was the case, that the atmosphere was denser and that it was that kind of temperature, some really weird things would happen. First of all, tropical plants would grow all over the world, and they would grow huge. Secondly, people would be incredibly healthy. That's considered to be the best environment for human beings. We would live long lives. We would probably grow bigger and stronger than we do now. There were some scientists in Sweden who did some testing of that and found it to be true. That really fits the Genesis account. It also fits archaeology. This is why we're finding, tropical plants up in the Arctic. Fossils of how do you get tropical plants in the Arctic? Well, that's how. That's how we're finding evidence of enormous tomatoes in the stomachs of mastodons. Makes perfect sense. So here it says God separated them. So at one time it was all just a pile of water, and God said, no, let's leave some water down there, and let's put some water up here. He separated them. And he made an expanse, and we call the expanse sky. If you have a King James, it uses the word firmament. And that's actually a pretty good translation of the word. Firmament, something that's hard. Because in the Hebrew mind, the birds don't fly through the sky, they fly against it. And you'll see that a couple of times in the Hebrew language as you're looking ahead. Matter of fact, that's where the word Passover comes from. We'll talk about that another time. Anyway, so God separated the two, and here's really interesting, verse 7. God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above the expanse. He made it. He didn't bara it. He didn't make it from nothing. The word there, I have already let slip out of my mind. I told you I was just a little off tonight, and it's just not all coming back to me. So I'll have to tell you later, because I'm not going to find it in my notes right now. Anyway, he made it. It's asa is the word. Thank you. Yes, the other word, asa. He took material he already had, and he made it, which we're going to find out in a little bit is how he makes a lot of things. So he created the world and everything that we see from nothing, but then he used what he made to make other stuff. That's going to matter when we get to the end of this chapter, hopefully tonight. So God made the expanse, and he separated the water under the expanse from the water above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse sky. Evening came and then morning. That's day 2. Now, God said, let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear. He continues with his bringing order from chaos by placing boundaries on things. This is a really common theme that we're going to see throughout the Bible. That God places boundaries on things. And as humans, we say, well, that's bunk. I want to go where I want to go, and I want to do what I want to do, and nobody should be putting boundaries on me. I remember sitting at lunch with one of the general superintendents of the Church of the Nazarene, because Wendy was getting ordained. And when you're doing that, they have lunch with you. It's pretty cool. And he was talking about how this was in Bend, Oregon, and how he flew into Portland, Oregon, and had to drive himself in a rental car to Bend, Oregon, and he'd never been there before. And I don't know if you know where Bend, Oregon is, but it's not exactly in the middle of things. And when you drive there at night, you're driving through the high Oregon desert in the dark, and it's not exactly well lit. And there's a lot of 2-lane roads. And so he's on this 2-lane highway in the middle of the night, driving a rental car somewhere he's never been before. And he said, you know what I was most thankful for? There were guardrails on either side of the road. I knew I couldn't go off the road. I was perfectly safe. I just had to keep it in between the guardrails. That's order. Chaos is there are no guardrails. I'm going to just end up anywhere. God puts boundaries on things because boundaries keep us safe. They keep us ordered, not chaotic. And they keep us heading where we're supposed to go. And one of the very first things that God puts boundaries on is the sea. He actually tells Job in Job 38, were you there when I enclosed the sea behind doors, when it burst forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and total darkness its blanket, when I determined its boundaries and put its bars and doors in place and said, you may come this far but no farther, your proud waves stop here. God said, I put those boundaries down. Did it myself. Did it on purpose. And it's good. He made the boundaries, and it was so. Verse 10, God called the dry land earth. It's a Hebrew word, eretz. We're going to be covering that one later. And the gathering of water he called the seas, and God saw that it was good. Tob, pleasing, fulfilling, wonderful. It was good. Good to have the boundaries. Then God said, let the earth produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds. And it was so. Isn't that crazy? Anytime God says something, it just happens. It was so. It happened. The earth produced the vegetation, and God saw that it was good. Then evening came, and then morning, the third day. We're going to talk about that whole concept here in just a little minute, but I really want to get to day 4 first, because day 4 is fantastic. Verse 14, then God said, lights exist. And there were. He said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. They will serve as signs for seasons and for days and for years. They will light the expanse of the sky to provide light on earth. He's talking about the stars. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule over the day and the lesser light to rule over the night, as well as the stars. Now stop. It's day 4. We already have plants without a sun. Now stop a minute. God already said, let there be light. Now wait a minute. God already created the heavens and the earth, and we know, we just studied it, that means the universe. What do you mean? Day 4, well, now we have stars and sun. What are you talking about? Listen, understand the perspective here. The perspective is as though you were standing on the earth. The perspective of the person telling the story is telling the story from our point of view. He's seeing what we would have seen had we been there. We would have seen total darkness and chaos. Did God see it as total darkness and chaos? No. We saw total darkness and chaos, and so God came in. We saw that the waters were just covering anything, and it scared us. And so God came and put boundaries, you see. Day 4, let there be these lights. What happened? I don't know. Maybe it was real cloudy up until then. I don't know. Maybe it was too steamy. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they really didn't exist and he made them exist at that point. I don't know. I will tell you this. When I read this creation account and I try to picture it, blows my mind. I have seen one of the things when we studied this poem in my Hebrew class, was the professor that was teaching us this, who was a wonderful Hebrew scholar, such a privilege. He had us close our eyes, and he read it to us basically in Hebrew, and he had us draw a picture of what we were seeing as we just thought it through and then draw. Think it through and then draw. It didn't look anything like what I'd pictured in my mind before. And if you look at how the Hebrew folks draw this out, they saw something totally different. Who knows? I do know this. When the day comes that I stand in the presence of God, if it still matters, and if he gives me a rerun playback where I can sit and watch TV and see this come together, it will look exactly like this. I don't know how. I just know that I'll be like, oh, well, now it makes perfect sense. But for now, I'm just going to continue to scratch my head and say, I don't know. But Jesus said it happened this way, and he was there, so okay. But now, hold on. Here's where it gets really good. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule over the day and the lesser light to rule over the night. And God placed them in the expanse of the sky to provide light on the earth, to rule the day and the night, and to separate the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. There is a picture that's presented here that we are going to see over and over and over again in Scripture. And I'm going to give you the preview for what the picture is. I mean, later when we get there, we'll come back to this. But I want you to see this right away, because I told you what was the purpose of the creatures on the earth? To shine the light of God's glory, right? The purpose of the creatures on the earth were to be worshiping Him continually, and He tells us how that's done right here. And He's going to tell us again and again how that's done. Did you know that this might be news to some of you? Did you know that the moon does not have its own light? Did you know that? How sad. The moon does not have its own light. But the moon shines light, right? Where does it get that light from? It gets it from the sun. It doesn't have its own light. It's just reflecting the light of the sun. Now, I really haven't seen the moon much since we got here. But down in the town where we came from, the moon was big and bright in the evenings. I mean, it was one of the best places for moon watching in the northwest part of the United States. My daughter has a really cool camera and a really cool telescope that people have gotten her, and we would go out and just get some really cool shots of the moon. I mean, it's freezing out there, but we'd go out, set it all up in the back of my pickup truck, and she'd stand up there, and it was amazing. But there were times when we couldn't see the moon, not because of clouds, but because it wasn't shining. Do you know why it wasn't shining? The earth was in the way. Here's the principle. Have you got it yet? God shines His glory. We don't have a glory of our own. The glory that we have is the glory of His that we reflect. That's what we were made for. That's what this whole system was made for, was to reflect His glory. He shines on us, we reflect His glory. The more He shines on us, the more of His glory we reflect. I remember when the moon would be huge and bright in the sky, and it was almost like somebody had searchlights on as we were driving home in the evening. It was so bright you almost didn't need your headlights, because the moon was closer to the sun at that point as it traveled around in the heavens. And it shines, and that's what we're supposed to do, be as close to Him that we shine such great brightness. And it works beautifully until, guess what? The world gets in the way. The extent that you will shine the glory of God in the place that you live and work and exist on this earth is directly relational to how little of the earth you allow in the way. The more of the earth, the more of the world, the more of the system that you allow in your way, the less of His glory you will shine. And we will see it again and again and again in Scripture. And there's one more thing we'll see in Scripture, and we'll really start seeing this when we get to the New Testament. Well, we'll see it in the Old Testament, but won't be explained to us until the New Testament. I remember we were down in Sweet Home, Oregon one time. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we were standing in the backyard, and it went pitch dark. Pitch dark. It was a beautiful sunny day. The birds were singing, and the chipmunks were chipmunking or whatever they do. And all of a sudden, it went pitch dark. Couldn't see a thing for like a couple full minutes, and then it got bright again. You know what happened? Yeah, it was an eclipse. Oh, it was neat to see. My kids were so excited. They were younger then, so things like that mattered. Oh, it was really enjoyable. It was really fun. I think they even canceled school that day or something so everybody could watch this thing. It was really cool. Okay, so in the analogy, the sun is the glory of God, and we reflect the glory of God onto the earth just like the moon does. And as long as we don't let the world get in the way, we can reflect the full bout of God's glory onto the earth to the best of our abilities. But sometimes we get in the way. Sometimes the world can't see Him because of us, because they're looking at our dark side. We better not get in the way. We better not get in the way. We are to be reflecting His glory. Great analogy that we see on day 4. And then, as we get to day, you know what I really love about this sanctuary? This is my 3rd time teaching in here total, 2 preachers and 1 teaching, and there is not a clock. You guys rock. You guys rock. Anyway, So let's get to the next day, because the fifth day gets pretty cool. God said, let the water swarm with living creatures, and let the birds fly above, or the word is actually against, the earth across the expanse of the sky. So God created the large sea creatures. That would be, it literally means sea monsters, and it's probably talking about a combination of, extinct things, as well as things like whales and those great big huge alligators and sea creatures that no longer exist. So God created the large sea creatures and every living creature that moves and swarms in the water. That would be like fish and stuff, according to their kinds. He also created every winged creature according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." Evening came, and then morning, the fifth day. Okay, there's a couple of really cool things in this little section. Let the waters swarm with living creatures. Let the birds fly above the earth, across and against the expanse of the sky. So God did. He did that. And He created every winged creature according to its kind. We're going to see that phrase again, and we saw it once before when He talked about the vegetation. All the vegetation came according to its kind. All the winged creatures came according to their kind. We're going to find out in a couple minutes. He creates livestock and wild animals, two different categories of earth-bound animals, and He creates them according to their kind. We might use the word phylum for the kinds of biology, of trees and grass. We might use the word species for the kinds of animals. God created them according to their kind. He allotted them to exist in that category. Now this is really interesting, because you can have a labradoodle. You can. But you can't have a bison bovine. I know that because a few years back in Wyoming, there was this herd of cattle. There's places there where they just let the cattle free range. They do that in eastern Oregon as well. It's always neat to see them out there just kind of being cattle. There was a herd of cattle, large herd, in Wyoming, and they have wild bison there. And one of the bison joined one of the cattle herds. Of course, he was a little bigger. He was a male bison, a bull, and they're figuring the reason he joined this is because he took a particular liking to one of the cows. Apparently, he thought she was real sharp. And he even tried mating with her a number of times and was physically successful, but there weren't going to be any animals. Everybody knew that right away. There weren't going to be any weird crosses because they're two different kinds. Now, you can grab different types of cattle, but bison, as similar as they are, they're different kinds. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The scientists told us this as we're all hoping for some weird mutant thing to happen. They're like, nah, it's not going to work. Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. One plant cannot be another plant. One tree cannot become another tree. A fish cannot become a mammal. It doesn't work. They are according to their kinds. And I find it so cool that God put that phrase in here 2,500 years worth of writing 4,500 years ago, so that in the 1850s, when we started saying, I wonder, he could be like, no, I already told you it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. There's another thing I think is just really cool here. So He created both the large and the small. Okay, I'm working on it. I'm going to finish this even if we run over, because I got a schedule. He created both the large and the small fish, and then He created the birds. Do you guys know where birds go to mate and have baby birds? In their nest, on the land. Now, wait a minute. Here's the cool thing. Here's the cool thing. Here's the cool thing. No, they're always on land. They're always on land. When they have babies on the land. They always have babies on the land. Albatross, great example. Albatross will fly for years at a time. An adult albatross will not land on water or land for years. Did you know that an albatross can circumnavigate the globe in 46 days? They will fly for years. They only land, and very poorly, by the way, it's a crash land. They only land to mate, rear their babies, and get back in the air. Now, did the Hebrew people know this? No. They saw a lot of birds that would mate on the land, even fly-aroundy birds. Talk a lot about the sparrows, the pigeons. They have their babies on the land. But there was a lot of birds they didn't know. They hadn't climbed to the highest heights. They had never seen an albatross land. They don't land around them. But God said, before they ever knew it, let the birds multiply on the earth. Not in the expanse, but on the earth. Now, I find that really interesting because people will say the Bible is not a science book. How can you take this as science? The Bible is not a science book. And I fully agree. The Bible is not a science book. And I'm really glad the Bible is not a science book because I remember when I was studying science how I had to get the new edition of the science book every year because it had changed. And every year, stuff that they told me last year was absolutely scientific fact. Well, now they discovered something else, and so we have to overturn that. And we have something new now. The Bible, though, doesn't change. Now, it's not a science book, but every time that you find an intersection with science, we find the Bible to be accurate. In Isaiah, God said the earth is a sphere. The shape of the earth is a sphere. This was during a time when the prevalent understanding of all of the cultures around at the time was that the earth was some kind of dome or that it was completely flat. In Job, we're told that the sphere of the earth hangs on nothing. This was at a time when the Egyptians said the earth rode on the back of a naked woman, and the Minoans said the earth was rested on the shells of turtles, and the pre-Indian cultures that we have, said that the earth rode on the back of a large elephant. But in Job, it says the earth is a sphere that hangs in nothing, or a circle that hangs in nothing. And in Isaiah, it specifically tells us it's a sphere. Now, that's not the Bible telling us, this is what you need to know about science. Science is for the purpose of discovery so we can get to know God through His created Word. This is just the Bible commenting on the facts, and it just happens to be right. Over and over again, we see this kind of thing. What do you mean the birds multiply on the earth? People said a few hundred years ago. I've never seen an albatross multiply on the earth. They do it up in the air. No, actually, we found out they land for that. Amazing stuff. Evening and morning, the fifth day, and then the day you've all been waiting for, especially my wife. Then God said, let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock, creatures that crawl, and the wildlife of the earth according to their kinds. I do find it interesting that He separates livestock and wild animals. Even before mass animal domestication, there was this concept that there should be two kinds. There should be wild buffalo, and there should be bovine. There shall be wolves, and there shall be dogs. There's going to be two kinds. There's going to be animals for you and animals not for you. We're going to see that discussed multiple times throughout the Old and New Testament, and so that was what happened. God made the wildlife of the earth according to its kind, the livestock according to its kind, and all the creatures that crawl on the ground according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our own image according to our own likeness. That is a huge verse and quite the stumbling block for the Hebrew because it says, let us make man. Now, you might know that the word that is God here, that we're calling God, is the word Elohim, and you might know that that's plural. El is one, singular. Elah is two. Elohim is three or more. And that might be a stumbling block for you. How many gods are there? And you'll actually find in places that God talks about the council of the Elohim. And people think, well, that must mean that there's lots of gods, because there's many. But the Hebrew will tell you, no, that's not what this is pointing at. That's not what God says when He's using the term Elohim. Matter of fact, He specifically says that Elohim is one, that there's one plurality of God. How does that work? Skip Heitzig is a teacher that I like to follow, and Skip Heitzig knows a lot of neat Hebrew rabbis. And he asked one time, how do you explain this? And he says, well, how do I explain it to people? I tell them God was using the royal we. He tells them, like when the queen says, we would like our lunch now. Well, He doesn't mean all of us, the queen. She doesn't mean all of us. She means me, right? So And Skip said, do you really believe that? And the rabbi said, no. No. It's a plurality of the single. It's not something we have in the English language. It's this idea of something being so big and vast and complex that the singular doesn't really work. You gotta describe it with a plurality. Like in Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah sees God high and lifted up, sitting on the throne. And there's these creatures that are flying around him, and the creatures are saying, holy, holy, holy. Why are they saying it 3 times? Did we not hear them the first time? No, we heard them the first time. Why are they saying it 3 times? Did they just notice three? No, it's because the holiness is so overpowering that for the Hebrew, it requires a plurality to explain it. Does God have 3 different types of holiness, 3 different levels? No, it's one holiness. It's one holiness. It's just so powerful that you got to say it 3 times. Elohim, the triune God. The triune God, God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit, is how we recognize that. The triune God, the God that is 3, said, let us make man, the word is Adam, where we get the name Adam. Let us make a creature called Adam, and let us make him in our own image. Why? Does God look like this? Is he just short of 6 foot tall, has a nice graying beard, wears a worn-out shirt? Is that why? No. Honestly, we look more like gorillas than we do God, as far as physically. Let us make man in our own image, in our own likeness. What is he saying there? You realize this is the first time that God has referred to himself in the plural? He's telling us something. That humanity itself will be a plurality. Let us make creatures. These other creatures are not a plurality. The vegetables, a singularity. There's just a body. The livestock, the wild animals, a duality. They have a body and a mind. In Greek, we would say they have a bios life, a physical life, and a psyche life, from the word psyche, a psyche life, a mental life. There's those 2 parts of them. With man, let's do something different. Triune, body, mind, and zoe, spiritual life. Listen, sometimes I can get Timothy, my 7-month-old Great Dane puppy, to sit down and wait for the food to be in his bowl before he attacks it. Sometimes. We're learning. We're working on this. Make him sit and stay and wait. But never once has he stopped and said to me, thank you for giving me this food. And never once has he stopped and said, I appreciate that there is a God in the heavens who has made dog food for me. Never once. Never once. That's a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual thing. To recognize that there is a being, remember we use the term transcendent personal being, to recognize that there is someone outside of me, outside of all I can see, that made it happen. That's a spiritual thing. People say, I don't believe in God. Wait until they're getting chased by a bear. Wait until they're about to have a car accident. Wait until they run out of money. Suddenly they believe there's a God. It's the truth. Wait until something goes wrong in their life and they want to blame somebody. My dog doesn't do that. He is a duality. We are something different. And the reason we're something different is to fulfill the purpose that God made for us. My dog can reflect some attributes of God because he is a creature of God, but he cannot worship God. Worship God requires a choice, and that choice is based in the Spirit. And if we're going to do what he made us for way back in the beginning when we very first started talking about this, if we're going to reflect his light and worship him, it requires that we have that Trinitarian-ness inside of ourselves. Now, we're not the Trinitarian of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but we're in the image, in the same style in that way. We have this Trinitarianness about us. And so, verse 27, I'll hurry through the end. God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of Elohim. And he created them male and female. He made them in two different distinct parts, male and female. We'll talk about why next time. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. God also said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the surface of the earth, the entire earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed. This will be food for you and for all the wildlife of the earth, and every bird of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. Everything having the breath of life in it, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and it was very good indeed. Not just good, but very good indeed. Wow, he said, that's just great. I want to take the time, but I'm not going to get to really break that down. So we'll start there next time. It's really interesting to see how every command that God gave us are the very things that we fight against. Be fruitful and multiply. And yet, the biggest political issue of our day is abortion. Be fruitful and multiply. Nope. Not going to do it. Fill the earth. Oh, no. Humanity shouldn't fill the earth. There are too many humans on the earth right now. We should be getting rid of humans. We should be having less babies. And so all of Western society is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And some Asian cultures as well, having less babies. There are too many people on the earth. Subdue it, control it, rule over it. Oh, no. The earth should be telling us what to do. We should be listening to the earth, not telling it what to do. Rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. Oh, no, we're afraid of them. We're not going to rule over them. We're actually really going to let them rule over us in fear. We're not going to do that. Huh. Interesting. And then, trees are people too, right? I mean, think about this movement. I hear the voices of the wind. There are spirits in the trees. The trees talk to each other. We can't cut them down. It's killing. Well, God makes this distinction here between those things and the things that have the breath of life. The ruach, a word that means the spirit, the wind, the breath. Those things that I have given my breath to, well, they can eat the things that I haven't given my breath to, he says. The way that God designed it was very good. Oh, but it's such a mess. The world's such a mess. And how can you tell me it's very good when little babies get cancer and die? Oh, we'll talk about that next time. So until then, let's pray, and we'll come back next time and keep working on it. Lord, how we thank you. How we thank you that what you have designed is very good, and how we thank you that you've included us in it. And how we pray, oh Lord, that we will reflect your light.